Welcome to Sunday Funday on the Acrylic Crazy Train. I'm Charm Bean, better known as Charmaine, and I'm with Alchemy Attitude Artistry. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Really do appreciate it. Tonight, my session, as is always the case, is dedicated to the jelly beans in our group, named and unnamed. And if you want a name, I am one of the wand wizards, along with my counterpart, Deborah Williams, for whom I could not do this without her. So, Deborah Williams is known as Devil Bean. We are kicking butt and giving names. So if you want one, reach out to us for sure. So tonight, guys, I thought that I would do a Dutch pour, better known as the elusive white whale for some of you. Dutch pour isn't so difficult once you know the trick, and that trick is consistency in your paints. With a Dutch pour, my flood coat or my base paint, unlike the bloom, which is a pillow, it's made with acrylic paint and water, and that's all that's in it. And the consistency is very runny. So when you think that you don't have that you have too much water in there, you've probably got it right. It's about 35 to 50%, depending on the quality of the paint. Because the more water you put into it, it degrades the paint. So you can't go any higher than 50%, and usually 35 to 50%, depending. So you really want something that's really runny. Do you see how that falls off the stick and it goes into the container and it doesn't leave a trace? No mound, no trace. Okay, so that's the trick with a Dutch pour. And my flood coat should be the same consistency as my colored paints. Tonight's lineup, I have all TLP. So this little piggy pigments, I have just a mishmash of whatever's on my table that I'm really trying to use up, which is a really great thing to do with the Dutch pour. First one is tail feather. The next one that I have is looks like mermaid, so it's another blue. I took a page out of the wombat chapter, and more paints, better, right? More color, better, right? The next one is emerald. My next one is groovy, really shocking pink color. Then I have asparagus, which is always a great color. I love asparagus. Then we have lily pad. We also have on the table here supernova. Sometimes I do a color combination. I didn't do that tonight because as I said, I'm trying to use up paints that are already on my table. And then the next one that I have is ore. Followed up by, oh, I have so many, lagoon. And the last one I have is submarine, which is a yellow. So I'm gonna get you down to the canvas. My canvas is a 16 by 20. And I am going to do a flood coat on it. And what I want to do with my flood coat is put my flood coat down, completely cover my canvas, and then what I'm going to do is tilt most of it off, because all I want to do is make sure that my flood coat makes my canvas wet and makes the blowing out of the colors glide across it easily, because your canvas has a tooth and the tooth will grab the paint. So if we put our flood coat down, then that makes it a little slicker. So come on down to the canvas with me. Really don't like to wear gloves, so sorry, Sassy Bean. I know you're probably cringing and thinking her hands are dirty now. She's got paint on them. I know it drives you crazy. However, I'm gonna get that down and to the edges and run my fingers along the sides. And then when I have my excess paint, I'm going to tilt it and try and put some of it back in my cup. I want to take my little butane torch and get rid of some of the bubbles because I just made this paint up tonight. There we go. Okay, I'm moving fairly quickly because I don't want my paint to start to dry. Okay, now design, what shall I do? Tail feather, submarine, lagoon, groovy, mermaid, or lily pad, asparagus, supernova. At this point in the video, I was getting ready to explain to blow the paint forward and blow it backwards into the corner. However, what I completely forgot to mention was that in a traditional Dutch pour, you would typically take your flood coat paint and put it around on the outside of all of your colors and then blow forward with the blow dryer. And I completely forgot to mention that. Now, I'm also showing you my Berta blow dryer, which I bought off of Amazon. I use it typically upside down because the cool shot button is something that I have to depress while I do that. So here comes that flood coat, the extra flood coat around the outside of the colored paints. Traditionally, I don't like doing this because I find that that flood coat color can sometimes temper the color of your other colors, and it gives a very muted effect, and that's typically not something that I like to do, but I wanted to show you how to do a traditional Dutch pour. Now that I have the flood coat white paint down around my colored paints, what you do is you take your blow dryer and you blow the white color onto the colored paints that you've already got down from both sides in both directions, and you cover it up. And what that will typically do is create some cell action, the interaction of the colored paint with the flood coat paint often will create a bit of cells. Unlike a bloom where you would put down a cell activator with the Australian Floetrol in colored paint, in a Dutch pour you don't have that opportunity. Now that I have my flood coat covering the colored paints, I'm going to blow it out. And the thing to remember with a Dutch pour is that you only want to go over your colors once. Otherwise, they become very muddy. You can see here the extra flood coat that I put around my colors, how it washes out the color, which is the reason I don't like to personally do that, but I know that there are many that do it. That extra flood coat can sometimes react and get cells to develop. So that's why some artists do it, but I find that it washes out the color. The trick with a Dutch pour is to make sure that you don't overblow out your colors. Go once, maybe a second time, but you don't want to muddy the colors, which is the reason that you do a very good blow out the first time in the direction that you want it to go. Now that I have my design blown out, I can take my straw and take the edges and move some of that color down a little bit, or extend my color up into the negative space area as well. I'm just using my straw to blow out some of the edges to incorporate some of the color in up higher into my negative space. And yes, I'm still wearing my Wand Wizard hat. And now that I've blown up my design with my straw and I've gotten it where I want it to be, what I can do is then take the a toothpick or a skewer and modify further, just as we would with a bloom. But I have to be very, very careful that I'm not going down too deeply into the paint, whereby my skewer gets grabbed by the tooth of the canvas, which will create really wonky lines. And I want to make sure that I pop bubbles. I take my little butane torch and give it a once over. That can sometimes create some cells as well. So you'll see me do my torching, and then after that I will pick up my skewer and do a few modifications just to give the design a little bit more interest. And yes, that's the international symbol for a toothy canvas. You can see with this Dutch pour, it's very muted. The colors are very muted. It's certainly not something that I traditionally like. However, it's really great. Somebody will love it. And afterwards, what I will probably do is do a bit of a color wash on some of the areas that are so extremely white. And that is just taking my colored pigments or my paints, as I've already got them made up, watering it down a little bit and brushing it on lightly in certain areas, just to give it a little more depth and a little more color in those areas that are so white. I'm taking my skewer and I'm pulling back into and bringing up some of the color into the negative space, just to incorporate the negative space a little bit more. And of course, you can play with your design, make modifications. Um, Honestly, you can play with it until it dries. Not too dry though, because ultimately what ends up happening is you start to ruin your design. So I'm just very quickly trying to show you some of the modifications that I would make with this, because the design is so muted. I really am just trying to play with the paint, try to create some interest, and give this a little bit more focal point in my design. And believe it or not, I wore my wand wizard hat the entire time that I created this Dutch pour. I completely forgot that it was even on my head. It wasn't until the end of the video that I actually took the hat off and thought, oh my goodness, why did I even bother to keep that on? You didn't see it, but I knew it was there. And let me just say that if I were to do a Dutch pour, I would not put the extra flood coat around the outside of my colors. You can do a Dutch pour that way as well. I find that it works much, much better for me. I don't like the muted colors, but I did want to give you an opportunity to see what it looks like with a flood coat around the outside of the colors so that you could see what a traditional Dutch pour looks like. And we are coming to the end of the video. So you tell me, how would you modify this after the fact? I'm not certain at this point whether or not this would be a Dutch pour that I would keep. I might let it dry. I might paint over it. I might do a color wash as I suggested I would do. I might do the color wash and see if that makes it any better. And if it doesn't, then what I will ultimately do is paint right over it. It's just not my style. I did want to say thank you so much, everybody, for being here with us tonight on the Crazy Train. And before we end tonight, big shout out to a few jelly beans. Desert Bean from Utah, she's a Canadian girl. We have Granny Bean, sometimes goes by Hattie, and Magical Bean, that's Tracy. Thanks so much, everyone.